Good morning, everyone. I'm Olivia Jensen. I'm the Deputy Director for the Lloyd's Register Foundation Institute for the Public Understanding of Risk here at NUS. I've got 2 reasons to be happy and 1 reason to be sad this morning. First reason to be happy is that this is the culmination to a lot of work. And I'm really very pleased and proud to have been able to share that experience with Leong Chi Hong from MSE and his team, with Samuel Chung from SUTD LKYCIC and his colleagues, as well as really not least my own colleagues at IPUR, Dr. Tra Trin, who's here, and Jared Ng, who you may well have seen on our communications. So it's very nice to see the results of a study, come out and to have this chance to present them in front of you. The second reason I'm happy is that you're here. It's a big day for Singapore. There's a new Prime Minister. And the fact that you're choosing to spend this morning with us rather than scrolling through other news really means a lot to me and to all of those who've worked on this study. And very pleased in particular to have some notable dignitaries with us as well, who I will introduce to you in a minute. The reason I'm sad is it shouldn't be me doing this introduction. It should be IPUR's director, Professor Leonard Lee. Unfortunately, he's very unwell, and Leonard is the sort of person who would drag himself off his deathbed to fulfill a professional commitment. But we were very firm with him and said, stay in bed and get better. We'll manage and we'll do it. But we're really grateful for all the support that he's given to this project over its whole course. And I know that he wishes he could be here. And I certainly do too. With that, let me give you a little taste of the day. This morning at least. We'll start with our welcome address in just a minute, and it will be my pleasure to introduce Prof. Cheong. We'll run through then our keynote from Prof. Loh. Then there'll be a bit more of me when I present the results of the report on behalf of all the people who've worked on it. And then we'll move into a panel discussion when you'll have a chance to ask your questions. And I know that some people have already approached us with questions, so we're thinking hard about those answers, and we'll do our best. We'll have a short coffee break and then reassemble at 11:10 in order to move into a panel discussion on engaging communities. And we've got a really interesting and very different panel group of speakers who will have a chance to tell you their views on these kinds of issues at that point. And then we'll wind up with, well, not Professor Leonard Lee, but me again, just to say thanks at the end. And so now it's really my great pleasure to introduce Professor Chong Kook Hien. She's chair of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities at SUTD, but not just that. Not just practice professor and chair of LKYCIC, but concurrently chairman of the Centre for Livable Cities. She's also a board trustee of NUS. Welcome to NUS, Professor. Rector of NUS College, as well as Singapore's non-resident ambassador to Finland. So we're very lucky that she's not in Europe at this moment and is able to join us for this event. She's former Deputy Secretary of MND, former CEO of HDB and URA, and she oversaw the planning of Singapore and the development and management of 1 million public housing flats. It's really a great pleasure and honor to have you with us, Professor Cheong. Please do come up to the stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. And like Olivia, it's happy news to see all of you here bright and early, 9 o'clock in NUS, in a corner of NUS. So it's great to see everybody and that you could find this place. Okay, I'm really happy to be here with you this morning. And actually this morning, we really like to throw a spotlight on the critical theme of net zero. And we all know that in 2022, Singapore announced its commitment to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And it unveiled the long-term low emissions development strategy to achieve this goal. The targets set are really contingent on the maturity of decarbonization technologies and effective international cooperation. And at the same time, Singapore is taking steps to accelerate our low carbon transition for industry, economy, and society. I gave this context because I'm also involved with Ministry for Sustainability and Environment, and it's really not an easy journey to do that transition. But achieving net zero is not just about technology. It is a collective responsibility and really demands very determined collective action from all sectors of society. While governments and businesses can spearhead sustainability initiatives, the individuals wield considerable influence through their daily choices and support for public policies. So all of you do influence the policies. So it's really imperative that policymakers develop a better understanding of how they can work with the public to chart our course forward. And I always encourage MSE to look at also the human centricity part of policy making, particularly for this transition. And to advance this understanding, of course, the two research institutions, the Lloyd's Register Foundation Institute for the Public Understanding of Risks, a very long name, and the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities at SUTD, which I don't know how many of you know, but, well, we're here with them. And we have partnered with the Environmental Behavioral Sciences and Economics Research Unit of the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment, MSE, on this collaborative research endeavor. Actually, this research collaboration unites the expertise of our academic institutions with the policy-making acumen of the government to strengthen our strategies to achieve net zero. The research really seeks to comprehend public understanding and attitudes surrounding Singapore's net zero targets and its accompanying policies, as well as the actionable steps that individuals are willing to undertake to support this journey. Well, to a certain extent, the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities is very pleased to collaborate with NUS and MSE, because the current study really aligns very well with our research approach, which is very highly interdisciplinary and emphasizes human centricity, even as we harness the integrated use of technology, design, and policy to provide urban solutions. The findings of the report that will be unveiled today will, I hope, help us to take significant strides forward in building collective action. The deeper insights from the study can lead to more effective efforts to galvanize individuals to embrace sustainable practices and champion eco-conscious decisions. And every individual's contribution will be amplified when they work in concert towards these common goals. As the findings of our research are shared later with everybody, well, we find cause for optimism. We always say, very hard to convince the Singaporeans, but there is cause for optimism. Individuals are increasingly cognizant of the net zero imperative, and many are actually quite willing to embrace lifestyle changes. So we should leverage on this growing awareness, guiding individuals to translate intent into action, and to empower them to become ambassadors for change within their spheres of influence. In a panel discussion, we will also delve into how individuals can actively contribute to the net zero movement. And the discussion will also examine whether it is possible to foster a societal consensus around this cause. So I trust that today's event, alongside the insights from the report and the how-to guide, will serve to initiate more conversations on the climate and net zero issues, as well as to help mobilize a societal consensus and collective action towards net zero. So I hope you will enjoy this morning, especially the keynote address from Prof. Loh. I'm very eager to hear what he has to say, and also the planned panel discussions that we have later and the conversations. Thank you very much for coming.
Professor Chong, it's really been such a pleasure to collaborate with your institute, and very nice also to have the opportunity to get to know you and your team. And so thank you for that, and thank you very much for giving us the welcome address this morning. And now, another great pleasure for me is to be able to invite up Professor Low Tek Seng to give our keynote address. He's the Senior Vice President for Sustainability and Resilience at NUS, formerly the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Research Foundation, a position that he held for a decade. So you can imagine what a role, what influence he played in that. Really a defining role in charting Singapore R&D roadmap, in promoting, managing, coordinating research and development efforts across the nation, and driving the development and implementation of 3 national research, innovation, and enterprise plans, the RIEs, which us academics pay a great deal of attention to because our funding is linked to that. But thank you, Professor Low, for being with us this morning. Please, let me welcome you to the stage for the keynote.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Well, very good morning to all of you. You know, Koon Hian has put a lot of expectations in you that, I'll give you a very exciting talk. I wore a T-shirt here today because, and this is PUB. And the reason is because, I'm on a PUB board, and PUB is a very good exemplar of what we have done well in Singapore. And, if you were to follow our water story, and there are quite a few people in this room that will know the journey we've taken. If not, coffee time, go and see Teng Chai. Teng Chai was once the CEO of PUB. I'm sure Koon Hian knows too the story that tells essentially of what the title of the talk is about, research or policy about the public, but more the way we do things in Singapore. Today is a very important day, as Olivia said. We are going to have a new Prime Minister by the end of the day, right? A colleague who was, when I was part of MTI as a MD then of A-Star, Lawrence Wong was the CEO of EMA, so we used to go for meetings together. But now, when I meet him, I can't call him Lawrence, I've got to call him Prime Minister, right? But Singapore became a nation state in 1965. I came to Singapore in 1972 to do my A-levels. But if you were to ask our politicians, our senior public service leaders, our senior academics, or anyone in Singapore, what's the secret of Singapore's success? And you will say that probably meritocracy. It's a country where if you work hard, you will be able to achieve what you want to achieve. Pragmatism, and more importantly, honesty, right? But in reality, most of our ministers will say good governance. Good governance. But in reality, beyond that, there was a very early appreciation by our politicians, our leaders then, that talent, people, are very, very important to Singapore, and hence our investments in education, right? Now, as we know, education is tied very synergistically with research. But our research story did not start until much later on. In the early years, some of you may remember, the most senior ones in the audience, about the Science Council. But in reality, the Science Council promoted science. They had quizzes, and you have at those times, the Singapore Broadcasting Corporation quiz, right? They had organized talks. But in reality, our investment in science was very, very limited. The serious investment in science and technology only started in 1991, not so long ago, with the first National Science Technology Plan, right? But the story went a little bit way back then, because there was a very eminent scientist called Sidney Brenner, who had a chat with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. And this is a hearsay, but I was told it's very, very true, because it came from Sidney himself, right? He said he met Mr. Lee and told him that, Mr. Lee, you must invest in science. You have now very good schools. You have a good teaching universities, but you need to invest in science and technology. Mr. Lee is a very pragmatic person, right? We invested heavily in our schools. That's why we have a very good school system. We have a very good technology education system, our technical colleges, and now, of course, our polys, and then our universities. He said, if you don't invest in science and technology, you'll be condemned to be a nation of technicians. Because if you look at that period of time in the 80s, we were a big manufacturing nation, actually climbing the technology ladder, but always basically taking protocols that came from the multinationals, and we do it very well in Singapore. But there's no original technology, no innovation in Singapore. And that was the start of 2 research institutes. The IMCB, which still exists today, the Institute of Molecular and Cell Biology, and then we had the Grumman Institute of Manufacturing Technology, which has disappeared. And that came about because we have a partnership with Grumman, who supplied us with fighter jets. As part of the deal was that they do some research with us. But we took it from there, and it's today, emerged as Simtech in NTU. It's morphed in various ways because manufacturing technology is very important for us. But this journey in science and technology started seriously only in 1991, when our Prime Minister, who's stepping down, was then the Minister for Trade and Industry. And with the encouragement of Mr. Philip Yew, they decided to invest $2 billion for 5 years, right? And this was very important because, they had a view then, rightly or wrongly, that the universities were not at a level that they could do good research, right? And in reality, if you look back in that period of time, and I was a faculty member, we were doing small projects. If I can get a grant of $50,000 from MOE, we have done very well. When I was CEO of NRF, I was signing checks of 50 million, right? That's the difference, right? But 2 billion over 5 years. And the intention was to actually build research institutes. But the narrative was one that is very, very singular in perspective, that is based on our economic narrative. So our research was driven by economic narrative. I would say that at that time, we paid scant regard to sustainability in the way we view sustainability today. But important for us then in nation building was the economy, right? So we built research institutes, and they came under what was called NSTB, which morphed into A*STAR, right? But I would say the inflection point came in 2 steps for us. So this started in 1991. In the year 2000, when Mr. Philip Yew took over NSTB, we invested in what we call the second wing, which is biomedical sciences. But I would say that that was not the most important inflection point for us. The next most important big step we took was in 2006, when the NRF was formed. When the NRF was formed with Dr. Tony Tan as the chairman, the expenses that we are willing to put on the table for science and technology expanded, doubled. And the doubling of the amount of money from about $6 billion to $13 billion, the biggest beneficiary were the universities, right? So if you look at the 5 big programs that Dr. Tony Tan initiated, beyond what A*STAR and MTIs were doing to support the economic narrative, was in support of the second narrative, that is an investment in science and technology to address the existential issues of Singapore. So one key program that he initiated was a strategic research program called the SRPs. And there were 2 particular SRPs that are very important. One is the Clean Water Program, and one is the Clean Energy Program. Right? I think at that juncture in time, our concern was about Singapore's resilience, water sustainability, and water security, right? So, investment in clean water. That was a view we took that, despite the policies we put in place, Singapore's, it's called a slogan city, right? That's why I wore this today, PUB, right? So the latest slogan is, safe water, big ways, small ways, all okay, right? But from the point I came to Singapore till today, there have been a series of these campaigns, right? And this is about moving the public together with the government, getting them to realize the importance of water. Today, I think all of us appreciate the importance of water to us, right? Right? That is the public. But this is also supported by policies we put in place. Because water consumption is not about only the public. The biggest consumer of water is our industry. You may not realize that, in the latest planning, between now and 2060, our consumption of water will double. And that's not because of all of us, because our population is not growing so rapidly, and we are all more and more conscious about the importance of water. It's our industry, right? But at the same time as we double water, we are not going to increase our carbon footprint. Now, how we can do that? That's going to be a tough call. Right? Now, back to the research story. So we had a clean water program, and that allowed us to invest substantially in our universities and our research institutes to work on technologies relevant to water. For example, membranes, because that was a start for us looking at beyond the single tap we have, no, 2 taps I think we have, right? One was our own reservoirs, our own supply of water, and the other one is water from Malaysia, right? Now we have 4 taps, right? We can desal, and we also process our sewerage for new water. And the latter 2 requires tremendous amount of new technologies. Initially, when you do desalination, when I was a dean then in 1998, when we first made our moves into desalination at some scale, the big cost is energy. So energy cost continues to be a big marker for us. So today, when we talk about water resilience, water security, we have also got to worry about the energy part of the equation, right? So, when we say, if Malaysia says that, I will supply you all the water you want, but there's a severe drought in southern Johor, I will need to up my desal capacity. Once I up my desal capacity, I require more energy. Will our grid be able to withstand the increase? But more importantly, if there's a big oil spill in our waters, we are going to be at risk that there's no water to draw to desal. How much more new water can I produce? So those are big issues that we have. And now, in a lot of things we want to do, energy becomes an issue. And as I said, the marine environment we draw water becomes an issue. So essentially for us, water resilience, water security becomes not only a water issue alone. It's a nexus that we need to resolve, which is energy, waste, and water, and the marine environment. In reality, the total environment around Singapore. But this clean energy, clean water program, how much? Dr. Tony Tan makes big bets, 500 million each, right? And where did the money go to? Primarily to the 2 universities. But they did not only fund research, it funded scholarships. So we have scholars going abroad on PUB scholarships, on EDB scholarships, but by linked to the SRPs, right? And that allows us to create this base. And this is a coupling of the research base we want to build for ourselves with policy settings so that we can actually move the government in unison with the technology improvements that we see that will allow us, to do things well. But we also need the public with us. That's why all these campaigns and all this, I wouldn't say propaganda, but this sharing the public, moving the public along with us. Right? But this appreciation of science and technology by our, what we call political office holders, is very, very important. So when I was the CEO for NRI for 10 years, a big message I get, a very important message I get from PM, and my chairman for many years, SMTO, was that, we must be able to bring science to citizens, to get them to appreciate the value of science. And that had always been the PM's message as well. So I hope after he started PM that he will continue to spend more time with science, because it is, I think, his first love, right? So now, if you look at PUB, driving our water strategy going to the future, Ting Chai was CEO, and we take a very long view. And that's one of the biggest advantage we have in Singapore, taking a very, very long view. We have stability in government. We have actually stability in resources that we have to expand. And finally, we have the ability, because of this in place, to take a very, very long view. Right? So coupled with water now is another responsibility that has been given to PUB, that is coastal protection and flood mitigation. So it's no secret that we have flooding spots in Singapore. So when there's no rain, PUB worries. When there's a lot of rain, we also worry, because if there's a flooding spot, the first thing that citizens will call is call the ministry. Sometimes they call the minister, and if that happens, PUB will get many, many calls, right? So we worry. But if rain happens in Singapore, we have to view it as a resource. So how do we capture it, right, and store it, right? So these are views that we will take to see how we plan for ourselves for a longer term. But we have to see this together with the potential increase in sea level rise. Right? Sea level may rise 1 meter, 2 meters, but if there's a storm surge, what we could face is a 5-meter wave. Right? I was just told yesterday by some very senior retired perm secs, if it's 5 meters, the water could reach Bishan, But it's a worst case scenario, very worst case scenario, right? But we cannot allow a once in 100-year thing to happen for us in Singapore, right? So we need to think about all this, how we need to protect ourselves, at the same time ensure that Singapore continues to be highly livable, and also to ensure that we do this in a sustainable fashion, right? So this belongs to PUB, and we take a 50-year view. So in fact, Mr. Chang Chi-Fu is the chairman yesterday at dinner, he says, we should take a 100-year view, right? So we should be planning for 3-4 generations ahead of us. And that is what we do things in Singapore. For us now, moving to the big topic for you all, going to carbon net zero, right? So PUB has to manage our water resources, at the same time adhering or ensuring we are in alignment with the government to go to carbon net zero, right? And it's impossible for us to do so if you look at what we do. We need energy to desal, to process new water, right? We need energy for all the plants that we have. So what approaches do we have? So we have a strategy called to replace. Any energy needs we have that uses fossil fuel, we try to replace with green energy. So the good thing is we control many water bodies. So Tengge Reservoir, you go there, you'll see a solar farm on top of the waters. We have done the ecological studies. Whatever we do will not compromise the biodiversity in the reservoir, right? But how much can we produce to meet our needs? Actually, not very much, right? Maybe about 20% we can replace our energy by 20% without buying green energy, without buying carbon credits. Then the next thing is all about technology, right? Technology means how we use technology to drive down or increase the efficiency and drive down the power consumption of our processes, right? Using, for example, moving away from the current membranes, potentially using biomimetics actually to reduce it down to this minimum energy usage. So by actually being more efficient, you can achieve a drop in your carbon footprint, but still insufficient. So what do we do? So essentially, we got to have strategies to remove CO2 that we cannot, compensate for because, we cannot reduce, we cannot replace. So that's why you have read in the news, we have a partnership with Aquatic, which is a spin-off from UCLA, that uses actually direct CO2 capture from the seawaters. And we have one big advantage because we do desalination, we have got very, very heavy brine streams. Heavy brine stream contains a lot of magnesium and calcium ions, which can actually fix CO2 and actually precipitate them as calcites. Right? So we have done the pilot, and we are now building a plant. So potentially, we have to look at different alternatives and think a little about a box to see how we actually drive ourselves to carbon net zero. But critically for us, in everything that we do, we need to ensure that the technology that we are doing is closely tied with the public policy, the policy to put in place. So even for industries, we have different policies to get them to actually reduce the water consumption. The water guzzlers, the FABs in Singapore. Actually, our FABs in Singapore are very, very good. As a mean, they actually recycle about 40% of water. The best actually recycle 2/3 of the water. And we'll continue to drive that, right? Data centers, right? The key for us is to see whether we can run data centers hot, or actually, hopefully, the semiconductor people can produce chips that produces lossless chips or minimum loss, chips with minimum loss, right? So that we don't need to cool them, right? So critically for us, the tie between technology and policy in Singapore is very, very close. And that is a big advantage we have over other countries. But primarily, if we are to succeed as a country, we need basically the whole nation to move together. And we have seen that for water, right? And we need to do that for the other existential issues that we face up to. So, I was told by Olivia says, time's nearly up. I thought, half an hour is a long time, right? But you never trust a professor, right? He'll just keep on talking. So I've got many things to share with you, but if you catch me during coffee time, I have to leave about 11 plus. But I'm quite happy to share more about our science and tech journey, about how we have over the 20, nearly 30 odd years now, 33, 34 years, how we have actually used technology to our advantage, right? But it's also good to realize that in some of the things we do today, we cannot do it ourselves. But beyond carbon net zero, resilience for us can only be achieved if you understand the risk and are willing to then address this risk and put measures in place to ensure that Singapore continues to thrive 4 generations down the road. With that, I'll stop and hope you all have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Now it's my opportunity to talk a bit about the report that we've produced, the study that we conducted together with SUTD and with MSc. Net zero has been this incredibly, how can I put it? It's caught on like a house on fire. It went from perhaps in 2018 being a term which might have been used in the context of buildings, more like net zero buildings, and suddenly it's everywhere, in the announcements of companies and the announcements of governments. And we see just during the period between sort of 2019 and 2022 that most governments in the world have now made a commitment to reach net zero, either in policy or in law. And I think of the signatories to the UNFCCC, the intergovernmental negotiations on climate change. There are 50 countries left who have not, but that means more than 100 who have made this commitment. And it's rare that there is an issue, a policy, a statement like net zero that is both sort of has a sound basis in science and is as politically compelling. That's why I think it makes it an extremely interesting issue for us to look at in terms of how the public responds to it. And as Prof. Flo has said, if we're to achieve this, it undoubtedly has to be a whole of society effort. Singapore's goal, as you will definitely know, was announced in 2022 and commits Singapore as a nation to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But why do we care what the public thinks? This room is full of experts, both in the realms of technology, engineering, as well as public policy. If we know what to do, why does it matter that the public is on board? Why does it matter what the public thinks? And we got a hint of it in Prof. Lo's speech, that bringing the public along is important in issues as diverse as public health and water and so on. And why does it matter for net zero? Especially since it is this kind of conceptual, sort of very multifaceted kind of policy problem. I think 3 things in particular. It gives decision makers, both inside and outside government, the opportunity to the possibility to identify opportunities to accelerate progress towards net zero. There are things, there are behaviors, there are habits that can change, which don't normally come into the policy debate, and yet those ones might have a significant contribution to make to achieving the goal. It's an opportunity to address misperceptions. Maybe people are well-intentioned, but directing their efforts in a way that's misplaced. And here's an opportunity through understanding what the public thinks to correct those misperceptions and guide people's efforts and their good intentions towards more effective behaviors. And of course, it's all part of taking into account the priorities and the concerns and the constraints of citizens. Moving to net zero, the transition to a clean energy will have losers as well as winners. And understanding who those losers are and how to compensate them or how to make that transition smoother and easier for them is an important part of what keeping the whole of society moving in this direction means. And so we recommend a whole of society approach to open up a wide range of policy options, to reduce the necessity for regulatory measures, for forcing people to do things, of course, it lessens the likelihood of disruptive or contested transitions. We've certainly seen those in other countries. And it can deliver co-benefits in terms of health, lifestyles. We think often about multi-purpose infrastructure in terms of coastal protection, for example, which will deliver new recreational and aesthetic opportunities. So we conducted a collaborative study. It's been a great pleasure, as I said, to work with partners. And I'm very glad that we had the opportunity to work closely with MSE on this, to understand, not just to be responding to a call from government for a piece of research that they were interested in, but really to conceive of this together and to understand how it might be important in a collaborative context. We're very grateful for that opportunity for the collaboration. The scope of the survey covered a little bit over 2,000 Singaporeans, 2,304 to be exact. We asked them about their knowledge and perceptions of net zero, their current actions, what are they doing right now, and what do they intend to do in the future, whether they supported policies related to net zero. We asked them about their values, and I'll explain a little bit later in the presentation why we did that. And then we also asked them where they got information, where they looked for information, and what information they trusted. In terms of the representativeness, our sample covered all age, education, and income groups. We had 18% of respondents were aged 24 or under, and 38% over 45. So you'll see that that's a little bit younger than the actual population of Singapore. And 55% had a university degree, so that they're a little bit more educated than the average for Singapore. Nevertheless, we made sure that all ethnic, linguistic, income, and education groups were represented in the survey. We did the survey in 2023, and then we did the analysis through the end of 23 into 24. The survey was conducted in English. We had a couple of specific questions, which included vernacular languages. There you can just see, and this is kind of for your reference, the differences between the socio-demographic breakdown of our respondents and of the Singapore population as a whole. Key findings. So after I get through this slide, everybody can relax, take a break, check their phones, and so on. Okay, number one, Singaporeans surveyed, they understood the concept of net zero. And we didn't just say, do you understand? We actually asked them specific questions to test whether they understood, and the majority did. However, people were much less aware of the policy target. We found that only 15% of the people we spoke to actually knew that Singapore had a 2050 target to meet net zero. Armed with the information that Singapore had this target, people were very supportive. So we told them that Singapore has the target. There was some clarity about that. And then we said, do you support this target? And we found that 65% supported the current target, but that's not the extent of the support. 17% said they would support a more stringent, a more ambitious timeline to reach net zero. We asked people about actions, and people indicated to us that they were already taking a very wide range of actions which are consistent with reducing their carbon footprints. And they intended to strengthen their efforts in the future. So we've got a willing population, that's for sure. In terms of the sort of demographic breakdowns, we found that older respondents were, on average, more likely to perform certain types of actions. And these were what we call low-cost and high-effort actions. I'll explain to you how we come up with those labels and what they signify a little bit later in the presentation. We asked about a series of policies, 12 different policies, and we found majority support for all of them. We'll go into more detail on that as well. But anyway, once again, a very positive and supportive policy environment in which decision makers can work. And people want more information about this. People don't necessarily want more information about the problem. I think people are very aware of the risks that climate change poses to Singapore. But they do want more information about what government is doing and what they as individuals can do. Let me go into a little bit more detail. Knowledge. Okay, So on the far left, you've got the vast majority of our respondents who answer the question about net zero as a concept in English. You can see that almost 70%, 69% of people were familiar with the term and they understood what it meant. But, so those people are the ones on the people who did not answer that question correctly, are the people who appear in the red bars on the left. On the three right columns are the ones who understood the concept of net zero, and these are their answers to whether they knew about the policy target. 25% didn't know if Singapore had a target. 24%, so another quarter of our respondents, got it wrong. They got the year wrong. They thought it was either further into the future or closer. And there were only 15% then, or 17%, who both understood the concept of net zero and knew when Singapore's target year was. So we see here a gap to tell people about Singapore's policy and the commitments that government has made. One thing we quite like to look at surveys is how people's perception of their knowledge compares to their actual knowledge. So we asked them those questions, which I've just presented to you. That's the left-hand side, nothing new there. And on the right-hand side, we asked people whether they thought they had a good understanding of net zero concept and policy. And you'll see a pretty big difference in the red bar there. So the actual number of people who had rather poor knowledge of the concept and the target was around 36% altogether. But only 14% of people recognized that about themselves. The ones who were very good in terms of their knowledge were about right. But we've got lots in the middle who were rather overestimating their knowledge. Now, why does that matter? That matters because it's more difficult to convince people to change their minds than it is to inform them on an issue that they recognize that they don't know about and may be interested to hear more about. So there's a tricky group there of people who think they understand net zero, but perhaps do not. And we need to find some ways, maybe more challenging and innovative ways to communicate with them so that they can get that message. I presented this in the key findings, but here's a pie chart just to make it more real. People are very supportive of the policy target once they know about it. Our question specifically was, Singapore aims to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. What do you think of this target? 65% say, yes, I support it. And 16.7% say, I support a more ambitious target. That's an extremely favorable policy environment for decision makers to be operating in. There may not be many countries in which that level of support for this challenging and important target exists. Okay, last bit of knowledge is on the perceived impact of individual actions. So we asked people a whole bunch of questions about whether they thought that these different kinds of actions were effective in reducing individual carbon footprints. It's pretty small, so unless you've got your glasses on, you may not be able to see all the detail here. Let me run you through the top 4 or 5. In terms of perceived impact, people thought that using public transport rather than private transport was greatest. They're probably about right there. Next, in terms of impact, people thought that reducing the use of single-use plastics, recycling as much as possible, were very effective in reducing their carbon footprint. If there are people who specialize in this in the room, you may start to shake your head at this point and thinking, those are great things. We want people to do those things. They definitely have a contribution to make to environmental outcomes. Are they the most effective in reducing people's carbon footprint? Almost certainly not, unless you order in at every single meal. That was a joke, even then. Switching to energy and water-efficient appliances, important, yes, but given that that is one small component of household energy use, and household energy use is one small component of people's carbon footprint, the final effectiveness of that action may not be that great. and turning off the lights when not in use. Now, if anybody has non-energy efficient light bulbs still in their house, fix it. But if you do, then it's almost certainly not going to deliver a big saving in terms of your household energy use to turn off the lights. Please continue to turn off the lights. I don't mean that. I just mean that people's sense of the effectiveness of these actions may not be fully in line with the ones that actually have the greatest impact. So we've got to burst people out of their current thinking about what environmental actions are and make them think much more broadly. And the ones right at the bottom, reducing air travel and reducing meat consumption, are ones that come out in surveys and international academic work on this in terms of assessing people's carbon footprints as being really big winners. And yet they're not top of mind for people. People are not yet seeing that every time they're made to take a trip for work or they choose to make a long haul, and I realize absolutely that this is where my carbon footprint is generated, that every time they do that, they're adding a ton or 5 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And that those savings are massively more important than the ones from turning off the lights. Okay, so we've got a really, I think, interesting area to look into here in terms of the gap in perceptions between effectiveness and actions Singaporeans currently understand them and the ones that are emerging from studies in this area. Okay, action. What do people do? So we have this long list of actions. They're quite diverse. We've got air travel, meat consumption, buying offsets, investing in sustainable finance. We've got those appliance ones, turning off the lights, and so on and so forth. And then we try to work out, using a statistical technique called factor analysis, nothing very complicated about it, but basically what you're doing is looking at the answers to those questions to find patterns in behaviors. And that allows us to cluster this long list of actions into 3 groups. And then we label them: high effort, high cost, and low cost. What do we mean by high effort? By high effort, we mean lifestyle changes, changing your diet, changing the way you go on holiday. High cost, these are ones where there was a direct cost to the individual. So that was like buying offsets, switching from a petrol or diesel vehicle to an electric vehicle, or investing in sustainable financial products. And then we have a set of sort of everyday type actions, low cost. Not just low cost, actually money saving a lot of the time, right? Which is reducing your household energy use, increasing the aircon temperature, hang drying the laundry rather than using a dryer. How likely are people to do these things right now? And how much do they intend to do them in the future? You will not be surprised that the green bars are longer on the right. People's intentions are higher than their current actions. That's just as it should be. We should all hope for better in the future. If we were to just focus on the bottom for now, on these low cost, these everyday type actions, you'll see that most people already believe themselves to be taking them. And if we look at the intention, we see that it's almost everybody. Almost everybody intends in the future to turn off the lights, up the aircon. In fact, I think they've upped the aircon temperature in here, to use public transport, and so on. The biggest differences between current actions and intentions that we see are in those, the high-cost ones in the middle. So that's like switching to an electric vehicle. You can imagine that that is a decision that people would put off into the future. Or buying offsets. You can imagine that people might not feel totally comfortable and knowledgeable about buying offsets at the moment and be waiting to understand it a bit better before they do. How about if we look at a little bit of the socio-demographic breakdown in terms of these actions and intentions? We didn't find that many differences, that many strongly statistically significant differences between the demographic groups. One that we did find, though, which I think is interesting and worth sharing with you, is about older respondents. Now, sometimes we think it's young people who are really climate conscious, right? It's young people making the effort. What we found from our survey was that in terms of these low cost and high effort actions, high effort, remember, changing your lifestyle, that older people actually signaled that they were more willing, intended more strongly to take these actions in the future. So just to help you read the graph, we've got young people on the left, older people on the right. If you see a rising line, that means old people have higher intentions. And if you see a falling line, you see that older people then have lower intentions than younger people. And so amongst the high-cost actions, older people were less likely. Does this signal perhaps that older demographic groups are a bit more cost-conscious than younger ones? Or maybe it's that these decisions are not yet on the radar of younger people, and so they project themselves as being willing to take them in the future. We looked a little bit more deeply as well into the kinds of barriers that people perceived. We offered them lots of options to explain amongst those who were unwilling or very unwilling to take these actions, like, why not? I think the responses that people gave were quite intuitive. Amongst the high-cost actions, you've got those big sort of greeny-blue bars, which signal attention to cost, so these were considered too costly. And at the top, so reducing meat consumption and reducing air travel, it was an issue of preferences. People signaled that they preferred the status quo. They didn't want to change the way that they currently lived. Okay, that's a big challenge. On the other hand, these are long-term transitions, and there are chances to gradually change social norms and habits in order to bring them closer to what would be a net zero future. We asked people about values. Why do we ask people about values? We ask people about values because in lots of studies on environmental behaviors, values come out as being a strong motivator. They're what we call a strong intrinsic motivator. So you can use behavioral interventions to tweak people's behavior, maybe to make it a bit easier for them to take the environmental choice, maybe to recycle, for example. But what are the things that drive people to do this when there is no stimulus around, when there is no intervention that's being conducted? And those are environmental values. And we can see that Singapore also has a rather conducive environment to targeting, allowing people to recognize and to act on their values. People were least likely to consider themselves hedonistic. And we, in the survey, that appears as people agreeing with the statement that you should live life to the fullest without worrying about wasting resources. They were most likely to identify themselves with being cost-conscious, dollar-conscious. So sometimes a bit of a stereotype in the way that we perceive public behavior. But right up there with cost-conscious are what we call frugal, so people who don't like to waste. They're not being driven primarily by cost, but they don't like to waste resources. And planetary values. So those are people who consider that they shouldn't waste resources just because it's bad for the planet. And combining these three, we see a very strong set of arguments, or a very strong value base for communicating to people about net zero. Was that actually linked to their behavior? So what we found is that if we were to look at the high effort actions, that people who had these higher hedonistic values were less likely to take them. And people with these planetary, frugal, cost-conscious values, as well as egalitarian values, were more likely to take them. Very similar pattern with the high-cost actions. Okay? So we see that values are aligned with environmental behaviors, or net zero behaviors. How do we use that to communicate effectively? Policy support. Again, a diverse set of policies that we asked people about, and very high levels of support. So more than 60% of people responded that they supported these policies, so across the board. Some of these policies are hard to argue with. One of them was planting more trees. That sounds great. And that was, in fact, the top most popular policy. But some of them are not so obvious. We asked people about their support for the refundable bag deposit. we've heard some pushback on that, and yet, well over 60% of people were, the disposable bag charge, well over 60% were broadly supportive of it. We asked people about a refundable deposit for like drinks containers, very high support for that also. Support for EV ownership, and so on. And then I'll also just draw your attention to the bottom one. So we asked people about whether they would support an increase in the carbon tax for business. You'll know that this is already planned into the policy program. And one that you might think, oh, sounds like tax, sounds bad, that people might be sensitive to. And yet, even there, well over 60%, close on to 70% of people were supportive of an increase in the carbon tax. Okay, again, I mean, I think this is, if you compare this to other countries, it's a massively supportive policy environment in which the government can operate and in which we can start to communicate about net zero. Information, do people want it? Sometimes we feel like we live in a flood of information and we'd prefer it just to stop. But people did signal to us in the survey that they wanted to know more. And the top two things they wanted to know more about, 60% of people wanted to know what's the government doing to achieve net zero. And 53% wanted to know what can I do to achieve net zero. And that is exactly what I think the study participants thought it would be useful for people to know. So we were very reassured by that, that people didn't feel like they just didn't want to hear anymore. And I just draw your attention to only a third of people wanted to know about the consequences of not achieving it. And we often think that strong messages are doom and gloom messages, like tell people how terrible the world is going to be if we don't do something about this. But what we see much more is that people want positive, actionable messages, that they can, where they can feel that they're doing the right thing, and they can also have the reassurance that the government is taking them in the same direction. Finally, and again, really distinctive for Singapore compared to other nations, and one for our media colleagues in the room, is that the two sources of information that people trust the most, by quite a large margin, are local news outlets, so the traditional media, and government sources. So sometimes we think, okay, let's put all our energy into social media because that's where people are getting their information. But in fact, on these topics, people want to see it coming. They want to see that information coming from reliable, trusted sources. And what they trust is government and the traditional media. Okay, some quick recommendations. How do we close the knowledge gaps? And how do we motivate action? Knowledge gaps, I'd focus on two. Let's tell people about the 2050 target. When they know about it, they support it. They deserve to know that Singapore has made that commitment and that they have a role to play in achieving it. Second, impactful action. As we saw, people don't have a good idea about where their carbon footprint is coming from, what's driving it. And we have opportunities here both to explain a bit of the science to people, to give them a more holistic understanding of the problem, and also to direct their energies and their efforts in a more effective way. Motivating action through communications, that's what we're all about at IPUR. For once, people want this information, so let's give it to them. And the high level of trust in government and traditional media, I think, gives us a very clear signal about where that information should be coming from. However, I'm going to reserve a role for research institutes, because we want to be a part of this too, and we would like to do what we can to help. I'll tell you in just a second how we are trying to do that. And finally, value-aligned communication. People's hearts are in the right place. Let's help people to align their actions with their values, and let's respect their values when we communicate to them about this. Okay, so what is it that IPUR is trying to do to help? We've produced this little guide. This is just our very first kind of starter effort to try to make it easier to gather up the information that we have on net zero, on what drives carbon footprints, and to present it to people, and to be as honest and as clear as possible. Okay, there are still gaps in our knowledge. And one of the things that we need to do, I think, is to have a clear study, a scientific study, to build the evidence base on what it is that generates people's carbon footprints in Singapore, taking into account all the specificities of the Singapore environment, the HDBs, water, Singapore's energy structure, as well as the way that people get around and people's diets, and a reliance on imported food, for example. Taking all of that into account, we've put together some information that we've been able to find. And our hope is that we can then deepen the science base, the evidence base for this, and continue to share that with people, not least to share it with people in government, as well as with the media. These are just a couple pages from what the report looks like. It's got cute squirrels, if you like cute animals. And one of the main points that we make is that it's useful to understand your own carbon footprint. It's not that useful just to understand that for some people, they spend a lot on electronics and that's driving their carbon footprint. Like, what is it that you personally do in your lifestyle that's generating your carbon footprint? And so would recommend using carbon footprint calculators. Now, these do exist already, so you'll know on your banking app that offers to calculate the carbon footprint of your expenditure. You might have come across the SP carbon footprint calculator. These are okay, useful, good place to start. We think they could be more transparent, and we think that they could be refined further. But it's good to do that. And then, on the basis of that, have a think about, you don't have to do the thing that's most painful. If the thing that really gives you pleasure in life is eating burgers, then don't give up burgers. Find another way in which you can reduce your carbon footprint. If the thing that's really important to you, and sort of on a personal note, my aging parents live in Europe, I'm not realistically going to give up that flight to see them once a year. I'm going to find something else, some other way in which I can help to reduce my carbon footprint. So do what's feasible, what's realistic for you, and what feels good. So last slide. Quite often, very often, scientists absolutely included, we think, why does individual action matter? My little effort to reduce my carbon footprint is not going to make any difference to Singapore's footprint. It's not going to make any difference to global climate change. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves why we do this. I think there are 4 good reasons. Number 1, pave the way. Social norms, habits, are one of the most important influences on people's behavior. So every time you do that small action of turning out the aircon, turning off the lights, recycling, not using the single-use plastics, you're not just doing something, you're sending a message to everybody around you, to your families, to your colleagues, to your co-workers. And all of that gradually helps to change the social norm in ways that finally have big impacts. It's also a signal to governments and firms. We know we need governments and firms to take action. And it's too easy for them to turn around and say, oh, the public wouldn't support it. Oh, consumers don't want that. Consumers just want the cheapest thing, or the easiest thing, or the most convenient thing. If people don't start by signaling through their consumption decisions and through their policy support that they want change, then governments and firms will not change at the speed that they need to in order for us to achieve our net zero targets. Small actions add up. It's true that if we think about one day and one person, it's not a lot. But if we think about cumulative actions over a lifetime, and if we think about cumulative actions of all Singaporeans, it does start to make a difference. And then, maybe the most important one is to live in harmony with our values. When you ask climate scientists, in between getting depressed about the future of the world, why they don't fly to conferences anymore, or why they recycle, their answer is, because I care about the planet, and I have to live in consonance with my values. I just feel bad when I do these things, and I know the carbon impact that they have. Let's not feel bad. Let's reduce our carbon footprints, let's do what we can, and give ourselves the opportunity to feel good about that, and to share that with others. Thank you very much. Now we have an opportunity for a panel discussion, a bit of Q&A. And I think I could ask Harvey New to take the mic.
So I've been called to moderate this panel. I'm supposed to moderate afternoon's panel, but because of, as you know, Leonard was feeling unwell, so I've been called to do this. So my pleasure, and we have here, I would say, the trio of most important people for the report which Olivia has just summarized for all of you. They are, of course, Olivia Jensen, you know, the Deputy Director of IPUR, and Samuel, who's my colleague, Senior Research Fellow at LKYCIC at SUTD, and Leong Chi Hung, sorry, I forgot his name, who is the lead at MSc Research Unit. So today, I guess I have to take a seat here as well. Okay, so I'll do that. I can do that. Maybe we'll start off by some of my privilege as a moderator to ask a question to them. And I've noted down the questions so that I can get it started. And you can send in your questions as well if you see the QR code on the top left-hand corner. All right, so let me just get my thing started because, right. So I thought that Olivia gave a very concise and useful summary of the key research findings. And I think one of the perennial question about environmental actions like this is this perceived gap. Well, it's not really perceived, it's an actual gap. People say they want to do a lot of things. We always say that we want to do a lot of things, but we ended up doing less than what we thought we would do. All right, so there could be many explanations for this. So I want to ask the panel if they think that, you know, first, there is some kind of pluralistic ignorance in Singapore. Pluralistic ignorance just means individuals underestimating how much other people know and are willing to do. Because if you think that other people are doing less, you will not want to do more. So that's one possible explanation. Or do you think, you know, there is some kind of social acceptability bias when we ask questions like this? Because people always want to say, well, of course I support this, because, you know, talk is cheap. And the third whammy, you know, is, as what is revealed in this survey, is that individuals sometimes overestimate their own knowledge. So if we put these three likely explanations together and they are not in contradiction to each other, wouldn't that mean a very dire process and journey that we have moving ahead to get people to actually do what they feel should be done?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take this first since I'm holding the mic. And I think that Olivia can speak to more of this in relation to her other streams of research. So our survey do not exactly support the idea of pluralistic ignorance, right? So even though we see that people do not have full knowledge of net zero and Singapore's net zero targets, when asked whether or not they support the concept of protecting the environment through achieving net zero in Singapore, an overwhelming majority say yes, and a sizable minority even says that you need to be more ambitious with your targets. So essentially what that means is that you have this situation where people want to do more even though they are ignorant. What that means is that, that there seems to be a push towards doing more climate actions, and we see that in the actions that people report that they do and their intentions of wanting to do more going forward as well. So essentially what that means is that we do not see this gap in this particular arena at least, and maybe that would be good for Singapore's protection of the climate going forward. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add by bringing us to where we were maybe a couple of months or maybe a year ago, where we started introducing the plastic bag charge in the supermarkets. And I remember Harvey and I wrote an op-ed in CNA, questioning, or rather asking the question on whether the honesty policy would work, right? I think some of the supermarkets, you know, they rely on your honesty to check out or to scan the number of QR codes, not QR codes, barcodes for the number of plastic bags that you took. And we thought, maybe Singaporeans wouldn't do that, right? They would just take from the counter and go. But that, or rather when the whole plastic bag charge was introduced, we saw that there was this rather seismic shift in terms of how people were consuming, whether or not they understood the impact of single-use plastic bags. But the introduction of the charge and seeing people around them bringing the reusable bags, right, to the supermarkets, to shop, to carry their groceries, it applied in some way some peer pressure, and what Olivia was mentioning earlier, pave the way. So not just paving your way to bigger actions, but also paving the way for others who will not feel so embarrassed now to bring us a reusable bag, right? And I think now it's quite the norm to see everyone carrying an empty reusable bag. Sometimes we really would not fold it up nicely, we just carry it, dangle it, and just walk to the supermarket and get what we need and come back, right? So we see that there's this change. So if we take this as an example on the more ambitious net zero and all the other associated actions that individuals could take, whether it's high cost, low cost, high effort, if sufficient number of people start doing it, and I believe by virtue of all of us being present here this morning, we have an interest, right, in this area, in this topic, and perhaps, after this report comes out and you have the how-to guide, we'll start making some sort of change, and we are starting to signal, or we're starting to pave the way forward for ourselves and for others to start making these small changes. And of course, small changes will add up over time. And I believe personally it will apply pressure to the businesses to get rid of kind of maybe the single-use plastics that they are using, to move to other materials, or to get organizations to rethink their products and services if the consumers demand this. And I think it goes some way to kind of answering Harvey's question without really answering your question.
I'm wondering whether social acceptability bias is actually a good thing. Because if people think that they ought to be answering the question, that they ought to be taking green actions, environmentally actions, that means we've already achieved something really important. I mean, I think if you went back 30 years, being sort of green, being too much of an ecologist was a bit of an embarrassment. People would make fun of you for that. And that's really changed. So that now the most acceptable thing to be is to pay attention to your carbon footprint. Of course, there's a next step, which is to get from people's now good intentions to their good actions. And there I think it's really useful to look specifically for each type of action at what the barrier is. Because sometimes there'll be sort of behavioral nudges which we can use. It's just a matter of making it easy for people at the right time. That might be the case in relation to the way that people dispose of their waste, for example, or whether they choose a vegetarian option in a food court. But in some cases, there's going to be a real cost issue for people, and in particular for certain demographic groups. Let's pay attention to that, and then let's design policies with a specific action barrier and intention in mind.
Thank you for those responses. I was seeing the questions coming very fast and furious from the audience. And from the look at the questions, I think our audience comprised of experts, some policymakers, and general, members of the public. So I have some more questions, but I think because of this high interest, from the audience, I will defer to you in the selection of the questions. And if you see your questions suddenly disappearing, that's a good sign, because that means I have shortlisted it to ask the panel, so don't worry. So the first question I have, and this came from the audience, is that Anonymous, okay, it's good if you put your name. Anonymous asks, can the speaker say something about whether Singapore's net zero emissions have a significant impact compared to larger countries like USA, China, and India?
So maybe I can take this. I can start with this, and Samuel and Oliver can add on. So indeed, Singapore is a small and open economy, right? We contribute less than 0.1% of the world's total carbon emissions. So, I mean, just by the look of it, what's the change that 0.1%? Like, what can that make, right? But what we need to know is that. The being able to ensure that we do not completely ruin the climate, all countries need to do their part, whether you're big or small. And if you do not do so, then that would just provide an opportunity for other countries to free ride on the efforts of other countries. And that is why it is important for Singapore to adhere to our commitments to net zero and to protect the environment. In order to do this, we have in place a wide range of different carbon mitigation policies. At the company level, we have the carbon tax. At the government level, we have committed to the government achieving net zero by 2045, which is even earlier than the 2050 for the whole of Singapore. And at the individual level, that's where everyone can play their part. So this includes things, as we discussed today, on how we can reduce our carbon footprint at our homes by consciously using more energy efficient appliances, ensuring that in our day-to-day activities, we try to prioritize the environment by choosing options that are more environmentally friendly and have lower carbon footprints. Beyond carbon mitigation, the climate may still impact us anyway. And that's where I think Singapore's efforts on climate adaptation comes in quite importantly as well. So what we have on the adaptation part is we know that sea levels will rise as a result of climate change. We know that temperatures will become higher. We know that there would be more freak weather, so there will be more intense rainstorms, and there will also be more intense periods of heat. And we have in place a range of different adaptation measures in order to adapt to these changes from climate change. This includes things like coastal protection and flood protection, as Prof. Loh said in his opening address and keynote speech. And we also have a range of measures to help us protect ourselves against heat. This includes the recent announcement of the heat stress advisories and plans to ensure that these changes that people can cope with these changes over time. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add one point, which is that we have a shared future. Right? In Singapore, every one of us, we have a shared future, and Singapore has a shared future with the rest of the world. So I think that kind of explains why we need to do something. Every individual and also as a country and as a part of the region and also as part of the bigger world.
That was beautiful, so I think I should run not to add. But I want to say something very briefly about Singapore's influence, which goes beyond its contribution sort of in terms of global GDP. In specific areas relating to the energy transition, I think in terms of its strong aviation industry and the role that Singapore can play in the development of sustainable aviation fuels, in its importance in the global shipping industry and as a logistics center, it has potential and the power to influence the way in which the maritime industry evolves towards net zero. So in addition to these kind of specific areas, it has that amazing track record on water, and in terms of increasing energy efficiency and desalination, for example. These kinds of sort of specific technologies, Singapore is a global leader and can be a global leader in, which will be important far beyond its simple kind of contribution to global GDP.
Right, thank you for that. As the audience multitasks, looking at all the questions, voting up the questions, I'll take a brief respite from this, the trauma of looking at thousands of questions coming in, and maybe ask a question of my own as well. So I think, Olivia, in one of your analyses, you included a factor of time. I'm just curious because effort was identified as one key criteria or factor, and cost as one as well. I'm wondering how time factor into our understanding of effort and cost, which may explain, in my mind, I haven't really done further research on this, why, elderly people might be inclined to high effort, was it high effort and high cost acts? Maybe they have more time?
Could be. So this gives me an opportunity to ask everybody, do you think that parents, so respondents with kids, were more likely or less likely to take high effort and high cost actions? Now, anybody who has kids or remembers dimly what it's like to have little kids will think it's a crazy time. The one thing you really don't have is time. Yeah. And the one thing you really prioritize is convenience. High effort, high cost, do you think that parents were more or less likely to take those actions? So, more likely. Okay, so there are two things going on here, and one might be that we're pressed for time, we prioritize convenience. I think there's a really powerful value-based and signaling thing that goes on there as well, which is that when you become a parent, you start to think, I'm behaving well not just for myself, but because my kids are watching me, and I want to be a good role model for them. I want them to see me behave in a way that's consistent with my values, and so that they will too. So I wonder, sorry, I deflected from your question, but I'm wondering whether that time issue doesn't get really trumped sometimes by the other things that are important to us. Time is important, and I think, and I'm sure that's a component of the sort of convenience/effort that we're talking about. Let's try to think of where that really is the pinch point and solve it. Because often it's more of an excuse, right, than it is the real barrier that's preventing people.
Maybe just to add on to Olivia's case, right? I'm a young parent. How many of us here would... we had a discussion over diapers previously. How many of us here would, go for reusable cotton diapers? See? Simple question, right? And we had this conversation within the team. And we say, actually, I think at different life stages, we have different kind of priorities, different needs, and of course, different disposable income. So I think it's really important for us to then tailor what we can do to fit the lifestyle, or rather both. It has to work synergistically. If the action that you are trying to take is way larger than what you're able to commit to in a sustainable manner, whether it's fiscally sustainable, so you should be able to afford it, and also behaviorally sustainable. You should be able to do it day after day, week after week, month after month. If you're not able to do it, then it's just like many people who buy a gym membership at the start of the year, okay, and by March, you see the gyms are empty, right? So we have to think about the sustainability, okay, whether you can see through these actions. And I think that's what really makes the impact, right? It's no point skipping one flight just to go on kind of what happened after COVID. Everyone tried to fly as far as possible to the coldest country. Right? So we need to think of it in that sense and kind of match our personal ambition and what we want to change, regardless of where or how, to something that we can actually see through.
Okay, so I'm going back to the audience question again. This is, again, from Anonymous. I'm sure not the same Anonymous, but it's a question about communication, and I think I'm going to take the liberty to broaden the question a little bit. The original phrasing of the question was, how can universities better communicate research and findings to the public in light of Singapore's information sources? I would like to broaden it in the sense that every entity has its own audience. So I would like to include the media as well, whether the panel thinks that there's some role the media could have played. And of course, we don't control the media. They have their own audience. But here we are dealing with different interested parties with things to tell to the public about this issue. So how do we better communicate?
So I thought that the how-to guide that IPUR has prepared as part of this effort is a very good way to communicate what we can do as an individual to try to achieve net zero within our own sphere of influence. A lot of the communications currently has been quite large scale, right? So this is like how companies can achieve net zero, or how carbon tax affects companies and things like that. But at the individual level, that has been a bit more lacking. And the how to guide is probably a good way to push that frontier. In terms of the various different channels of communications as well, what we find is, as the previous question has discussed, that different demography of people speak to different parts of net zero actions, or different types of net zero actions. And as a result of that, what that essentially means is that maybe different channels could be used to reach different demographies of the population, to encourage them to do actions that speak to their lifestyles. So maybe that could be the way forward. Yeah.
I think this event is a great example of that, right? How we bring everyone from different parts of society. So we have people from the people sector, the public sector, the private sector, hopefully. They're all represented here. And of course, then you have the fourth part, which is academia, right? We are all here today in this room. We are all interested in the topic. And that's the start of this conversation, or this sharing of information. But I think, as we saw in the findings, then there is trust and there is a lot of use. So people turn to the local media outlets. So we can tap on that. And I think academics, it's quite nice to see many of us working more with, collaborating more with the media. For instance, working with them on programs to communicate the science, right? So, topics like sustainability, climate change, some parts of it can get very technical. But how do we communicate this in a manner, or demonstrate the concepts in a manner that the public is able to then understand? It's part of I view it personally as an academic, we should have that responsibility of communicating the work that we do. Okay? Frankly, if we write a journal paper, how many people would read it, right? Maybe the students read it because it's an assignment, it's assigned to them, right? But the public wouldn't read it. So how we could be more active going out to disseminate some of these findings, but we have to understand that it has to be in an understandable manner. And of course, if you're going out, then it's in a way that is very palatable also. And importantly, I think encouraging. Okay? Letting people know that what they can do actually would matter, and it all adds up.
Two thoughts. One is that I think we, as my institute, but us, as everybody who's got some risk-related information to share, could be much more strategic and much more rigorous in the way that we communicate. Very often, the communication part is sort of tacked on at the end of the project. Oh, we did this work, I guess we should put out a press release. In the case of a communications campaign or an intervention, maybe by an official agency, a government authority, or by a company, communications usually responsibility lies in the comms department. The opposite end of the company or the organization from the researchers. And so tying up that idea that we should evaluate. We should design, pilot, and evaluate our communications in the same way as we design, pilot, and evaluate our other interventions. I don't think we've come close to doing that yet. So this how-to guide that we've produced we should now test it on you. Please read it. And, we should have a form that says, was this useful? Did you learn anything from it? Which part did you like? What more would you like to know? And we should feed that back into our next communications effort. I don't think we're doing that systematically. And I'm not sure that the way that sort of research gets funded and generally done really incentivizes us to do that. And so I hope we can do more of that in the future. Second thing is that communications is a chain. So there are occasions on which we do research and we communicate right to the public. Most other occasions, we will do research and we will communicate to the University Communications Office. We might communicate directly with media. Then media might put out a story, and that story then might get circulated on social media and eventually get to a member of the public. So I think we have to think about the multiple chains through which information flows, how it gets modified as it goes through that flow, and how we can ensure that accuracy, reliability, and trustworthiness are maintained throughout that flow.
Maybe I would like to, I'm not part of the panel, but I would like to add on to this. I think as academics, and this question was specifically about academics, we have to learn. We have learned to be more media savvy. We can write research papers, and of late, we know that we need to repackage the research findings in a way that is publicly accessible as well. But we should go further. Knowing how the media works, knowing what the media targets at, we could even repurpose that public message in a way that entices the media to take up the story. I think it's not too much of an effort, and it's something that we can learn, and we should learn as academics to do. So that's my response as well. I'm going back to the audience questions again. I'm very drawn to philosophical, existential questions. So I'm going to ask one from the audience, which is the low desire society witnessed in Japan a possible approach to net zero? How do you see the possibility and desirability of a low desire society in Singapore? Quiet. Anyone wants to take a step? We have to ask
So I need to say that I'm probably not super familiar with low desire society in Japan. But I think that Samuel's point just now on how working, or rather making climate actions a habit is really habit formation, right? So you do not want to jump to the deep end of the pool and hope that you can swim, right? You do want to learn to swim first. So, start off with the baby steps and work your way up, right? So, as Samuel just said, you probably do not want to go in with the hardcore gym membership, right? Don't start with the P60X or whatever kind of difficult sort of workouts. Like, start off with the warm-up and work your way up from there. So using that as an analogy, what essentially that means in Singapore context, given that I would guess that we are relatively far from a low desire sort of society, is that we do need to start off with actions that people do want to perform, that people know that they can do on a day-to-day basis, and work your way up from there. So this includes things like the lower hanging fruit of conserving energy and water use within the households, and then moving up from there, right? So the higher impact actions, and that's where further studies can come in to tell us what are some of these higher impact actions that can be prioritized in the households. And some of these higher impact actions may actually be relatively easy to do. And then after that, you go on to the more higher delta sort of actions that is harder from a habit perspective and change of lifestyles and things like that. Yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
Okay. Is it about a low desire society, or is it about changing what we desire? I think often I feel that I would prefer to buy less of something that would be more beautiful and last longer, one nice bit of clothing that would last for a couple of decades, or one bit of furniture that wouldn't look tatty after 5 years of use. Is it possible to redirect some of our desire to be surrounded by beautiful objects and to have joyful experiences towards ones that are more compatible with net zero? Can we have more holidays that are not just superficially kind of ecotourism, but more meaningfully ecotourism, that give us opportunities to be in nature, something that I think studies have found is enormously beneficial psychologically, to be in nature in a way that's harmonious with nature?
You want to add something, Samuel?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, why do we have to be a low desire society? Why can't we start with our own personal low desire lifestyle? Right? Instead of aiming quite high, we could personally all make this kind of your mid-2024 resolution, right? To make this change, and you could do it. No doubt it's going to be very difficult. Okay, but early adopters always get both the benefits or the street creds. Yet at the same time, right, you got to put up with all the teething challenges. So it is possible, right, for you to do it yourself and be that kind of beacon of hope that we could eventually, as a society, move towards that direction. If that's what you really believe in, and that is what you value, right? So. From behavioral science or psychology perspective, then we start with the individual, right? And we can all be this catalyst for this change.
Yeah, I think even if we would never encounter the word low desire, it will set off warning alarms in your head, because it suggests a low consumption rate, leading to lower economic development. But as Samuel and Olivia especially have mentioned, I don't think it's necessarily contradictory to economic development if what you are thinking of is a more curated, individualized desire or meaningful desire, or what I would see as a diversified desire. I think without desire, some form of desire, society will be such a boring place. I wouldn't want to live in that society, personally speaking. So I was told that we have only one last question to go for the time that we have, and I'm picking one from the audience again. Any suggestions to improve corporate awareness, not just individual or the government, on net zero, so that they can make a larger impact for carbon emission reduction?
So in Singapore, as part of the Singapore Green Plan, there has been a range of different initiatives on the corporate side. One of the main initiatives is the carbon tax. And what the carbon tax does is essentially incentivizes firms to internalize the external cost of carbon emissions. By doing so, we make the firms right-size their production, as well as take into account carbon emissions when they design the production process. So essentially what that means is that firms would produce less externalities, so these are carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, and as a result of the lower levels of such emissions, they would then have cleaner products that are more carbon efficient. So that is one of the key thrusts. There's also direct incentives to firms to get firms that are more pollutive and emit more greenhouse gas emissions to retrofit their processes and to change their processes in order for the processing, the manufacturing process to become more environmentally efficient as well. Another thrust is, as Prof. Loh said right at the start of this session, is research. So there has been a wide range of different research grants as well as research institutes that look into manufacturing from a climate perspective, right? So this includes greening the entire manufacturing value chain across various different industries, and that helps with this entire process as well. part of the corporates is also the intermediaries, right? So these are banks and green finance, and there has been a large trust by the Monetary Authority of Singapore on green finance, and that helps with incentivizing firms themselves when they look into their investments, whether or not they can invest into green investments and things like that via green financing. So there has been quite a large body of work on the corporate side, and that complements the work that is being done in today's presentation on the individual side.
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think awareness is the issue. I think this change has to be government-led, and it has to be led by regulation. And some of that regulation could take the form of positive incentives, encouraging innovation and research, as Xu Hong has mentioned. But some of it is in the form of much more traditional type of regulation, which is taxations and bans on certain types of activities and certain ways of doing things. I don't think we can rely on the open-mindedness of the private sector to take forward these very important and sometimes costly changes that are necessary to reach net zero. In my mind, that's firmly the role of government, which protects the public interest.
So, okay, unfortunately, we have to close this panel. I'm very heartened that we received actually more than 60 questions from the audience. If you can catch the panelists during the break, you can, follow up with a question. I apologize that we could not ask, obviously, all the questions, and thank you for the panelists for the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. Welcome back. It's nice to see at least your state after the coffee. So I think in the first session, we had a bit more technical information. We had quite a lot of graphs and bar charts. Okay? And it was more kind of sharing of what the report was. So in the second panel, we thought, we talk a lot about what could people do, how can we start getting people to think about their actions and to start, making that change, right, towards contributing for Singapore's net zero ambition. So in the second panel, we are going to switch it around and we are going to ask the people, right, the representatives of the community. Actually, if it's possible, we'll get everyone on stage, but we can't. So we have 3 of them to represent the community. And I think in this panel, we want to focus on the key question: how do we start to get the communities on board, right? And let me introduce our panelists today. Same thing with Harvey. We have too many screens. We have to toggle with it. Okay. So on my extreme left, on your right side of the stage, we have Min Chai. So Min Chai is here in his personal capacity, okay, and he serves in the as a district councillor in the Southwest Community Development Council, and he looks into areas of sustainability, youth engagement, and also mental well-being. Okay? And then in the middle we have Akbar, who is an urban sustainability practitioner, but he also runs his own consultancy, and he tries to merge his consulting with societal impact and also sustainability. And he leads, interestingly, he leads Ismaili Civic for Southeast Asia, and where they focus on improving the quality of life and the environment through civic ecology, well-being, and cultural conservation initiatives. Okay? And we have Rachel. She's very interesting. She is, we went back and forth what she would like to call herself. We ended up as climate advocate, right? So Rachel is interested, and I'm reading what she wrote, right? Rachel is interested in all things food and environment. Okay, and I'll give a shout out to her. She runs an Instagram page called @Escalator. Okay, so if you follow the page, you'll see that she talks about sustainable agriculture. And I was quite impressed with a series of posts that she made about tapioca, right? She don't know, but I follow her and I see a series of posts breaking down tapioca. Sorry, the mic just went off. So breaking down tapioca, right? And that's quite an interesting one. Okay, and recently she joined the Singapore team at COP28 as a youth delegate. Okay, so I think they bring a wealth of experience and also a wealth of interest cutting across different areas that are all related to sustainability and net zero. Okay, so just to start the panel, right, with a simple question. Okay, and I think I'll get each one of them to answer. Okay, while you input your questions, while you input your questions into Slido using the QR code on the top right. So maybe I'll ask each of you what was your key takeaway from this morning session before the coffee break.
Well, can you hear me at the back? I'll try my best. I think the acoustics is very good here. Okay. I think, thank you, Samuel. This, we've heard everything from academic to, and for me as an individual, I'm always trying to see how can I translate it back to my life and, simplify it to understand as well. And I think there are a few things that I could resonate with was the fact that I've lived many lives in this span of life. I've lived in New Zealand and in many countries. We also live different lives in tests. Okay, we live different lives within a day. So it's very interesting that we sometimes conflict with what we want to do sustainably, and when you come back home, everything goes over the roof. And then when you're working with the community, you're getting questions about how can we improve this, how can we do better for the residents, or from a grassroots or a community partner. So I think this, being comfortable under our skin, knowing that we will have different stages of our life, is very important. You need to be comfortable with that. I married a vegetarian, and I love my meat. So, and then, I was like, okay, that doesn't matter. I think it's okay. The point is that we relate to each other in many other ways. But then when we live together, we realize, wow, very different lifestyles, very different ways of looking at food as well. And in Singapore 10 years ago, that's not me, I think. So 10 years ago, the menus in Singapore, you look at them and the vegetarian options are almost impossible to find anything. So that's when I really realized that, wow, our lifestyles are very different, but now the number of salad bars and options that are available, it's completely transformed in the last 3-4 years. So I think it's very exciting as well.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the report, I think the stuff that stood out to me was how a lot of the high effort actions were the ones that people felt like they were the biggest barriers to take, which I guess was surprising to me, because I thought a lot of the narrative around sustainability has been that it's expensive, and then on the other hand, of course, the counter narratives are like, oh, it's not that expensive, because if you're bringing your own reusable cup, maybe you only need to buy it once, that kind of thing, and sustainability doesn't have to be expensive. But then when we actually kind of looked at the data, I feel like a lot of the high effort actions that weren't necessarily branded as expensive, like for example, reducing meat consumption or reducing the number of holidays that you take via air travel, I felt like it was pretty surprising to me that those were the things that people struggled with doing, like behavioral changes, because I personally felt like that was where I started. And that's usually what I usually bring up on social media or during workshops that we hold, that kind of thing. So I guess it was surprising to me that those were where people felt the main barriers were. Yeah.
Hi, morning everyone. Pleasure to be here. For me, maybe rather than talk about what's my greatest takeaway, I think what excites me the most. What excites me the most, first off, was that this entire report itself was really based on behavioral science. Okay, I think as a country, we have we have very solid infrastructure as foundations. I think what is really stopping us from making the switch or the change is really in the behavioral of our citizens itself. So to have a report, a very concise report on the behavior of our citizens, what they react to, what they are averse of, I think this is something very exciting for me. Second exciting point was seriously seeing SUTD as well NUS logo up there. because this is something that we should aspire towards, having more collaboration and synergy between universities. Okay, so just to share a little, I'm actually currently I'm with the Health and Active Living FC with Southwest CDC, but I was previously from the Environment FC as well. So I'm currently like in a way in limbo between two, and it's good because this is where we actually look into how we can curate and create new programs which synergize green efforts together with healthy efforts that we have in the district. So we're looking forward to sharing more at other platforms as well. Samuel?
Okay, thank you for sharing your takeaway and also what excites you from what was shared this morning. But now we've returned to your experience in your own capacity. Min Chai is looking away. So what do you think are some of the greatest challenges, right? Because in the report we talk about perhaps it's cost. Some of the actions might cost people a bit more, or it involves quite a high level of effort. Right, but in your kind of experience working with the communities, working with your organizations, what do you think might be some of the barriers in which are there that we need to tackle beyond cost and effort?
Okay, I think one of the greatest barrier we have is actually, like what we mentioned earlier on, about the behavior of our citizens, what motivates them and such. I do quite a bit of systems work, so I think there's a saying that systems drives behavior. Okay, so this is one aspect. But other aspects of it is behavior also drives systems, and systems and behavior drives culture. So this part is something, this triangle, this relationship between these three factors is important for us to understand. So what is the one key thing that we need to, one challenge for us is really in the culture, the culture of Singapore as a whole on how we can bring about greater sustainability effort. Okay, let's take for example, earlier on I had a conversation with my friends over there. So he was telling me that, hey, you're always flying off over to Japan. That contributes a lot to the carbon emission as well. Why not just go to JB nearby for a short holiday? Well, that's true, that's true. But if you take a look back, if you take a step back, as a citizen, I mean, as someone who would like to spend time with my family overseas because they like to be overseas, am I willing to make, okay, that was the coffee working, yeah. So, am I willing to make the sacrifice of having a holiday in nearby JB when I could actually go into Japan where I can enjoy the cold weather and stuff like that? So this comes into mindset as well as a culture. My day job, I work in the education sector. I won't mention what particular area. We do a lot of upstream effort, a lot of educating of the kids, all right, in terms of things like sustainability efforts. So it starts from young. My generation, I'm middle-aged. All right, middle-aged, yeah? Okay, I'm middle-aged. My generation were not raised on things like being green. We do not know the benefits or the importance of being sustainable as compared to the younger ones here. I'm assuming Akbar is in the 20s, huh? All right. So we are not raised in that way, so therefore the culture is not apparent for us. So for people like my generation, what we should be looking at is the behavioral changes that comes with the system of the programming and the education effort that comes in before we can talk about changing the entire culture. So different generations will have different impetus and also different challenges. So this is something that all of us can think of when we are doing our programming, because we need to look into the multiple tiers, especially in terms of the age gap and the generation gap that we have between the different segments of people. Yep.
Well, I think one of the challenge that I completely agree with this point on, the phases of life. I also feel in between that when we are working with larger communities, I'll give you an example. We feel, Smiley Civic feels very strongly about working with, improving quality of life for women, giving them access to education and opportunities. And there's a bunch of amazing 1,000 women in Singapore. I won't name the organization, but they have such potential. They're well bonded, they're well educated, and they spend a lot of time together. And one of the areas that we did, many of our advocates came together and said, look, we need to get more women as part of this conversation around environment, not only because they lead their households, but also the fact that they have time to add a lot of pragmatic solutions to some of the issues that we face in our daily lives. So we said we'll start climate workshops, we'll train them to become facilitators, and then bring them to schools. We worked through 6 months of conversation back and forth between the team. And when it came to talking to the higher board, advisory board, they said, this is the least of our priorities. We need to focus on all these other things as well. What I'm trying to say is that in many phases in the last few years that I've been in this space, we do face a lot of challenges in, it's like a startup. You're working with a new organization, you're trying to convince them that, hey, you can be part of this change. You can definitely be an advocate as well, but not everyone wants to be part of this. So how can we ensure that we're doing good arbitration? How can we mediate situations where it doesn't just fall off the cracks and we don't have the opportunity to continue this conversation? So it's a long-term discussion that we must have in that system to be able to continue that dialogue, because it's not just, we might have women as part of this conversation, but imagine if we had diversity in that dialogue as well, to bring in new perspectives from a youth or a migrant worker or a domestic helper being part of that solution as well, and saying that we don't know enough about how to recycle or reuse. Is there any other solutions? We don't know about climate change. Can we bring out a deck of cards and start having some fun and learning more about the climate? These are some of the challenges that we face as an organization.
I guess from most of my experiences, I feel like a very big part of the issue is what Ying Chan mentioned about behavior, right? I feel like a lot of it is what kind of narratives surround certain types of behavior. I think earlier in the morning was mentioned that because of the disposable plastic bag charge, then it becomes less embarrassing, was the word that I picked up on. It becomes less embarrassing to bring a reusable bag. And similarly, I think in a lot of the behavioral changes, talk about reducing meat consumption, for example. If at the office I'm getting 3 veg and no meat, which is something that I do regularly, right? I have office, my colleagues comment on things like, oh, why? Because there's this impression of being almost cheapo when you don't go for meat, because meat in our culture, I guess, is also aspirational, right? There's that element of that. So just the kind of narratives that surround the behaviors that we are asked to make, or for example, if you're bringing reusable bags, I guess now with the charge it becomes more acceptable, but before that it kind of brands you as someone who is very eco-conscious, which is not necessarily a label that people would be comfortable with, although I'm sure that's changing. Or for example, that day at work, I think one of the uncles who was pushing, so he collects the cardboard, right? And his cart was broken, he was trying to fix a wheel back on it. And I guess the first, when he came to borrow a toolbox from us, the first reaction that we had was oh, he should just get a new one, because off Taobao, off Shopee, it's very cheap, right? And so there's almost that impression also of when you fix things, which of course ties back into consumption, which ties back into emissions, right? It's also a very cheapo act, because you can get things for cheaper now and for new and stuff like that. So I guess one of the things that I feel when I'm trying to convince people to change their behaviors on, one of the barriers is what kinds of other things that making that behavioral change says about them to other people.
Okay, thank you for that. I think you covered a lot of different challenges that might impede people from. Oh, you're done. No, okay. So, but I think the audience they were sending in a lot of questions on Slido, and same thing. If your questions disappear, they have gone into the other screen where we're trying to put them all together. But I think there's a genuine interest from the audience to understand a bit more about the different kind of organizations you are in or involved in, and they would like to know a bit more about some of the initiatives or kind of the plans that the organizations might have towards helping with this net zero transition.
So, in personal capacity, I do a lot of social media. I write long form on a private blog. I'm also a volunteer with an organization called Lepak in SG. So we are completely volunteer run, and we do a lot of advocacy work on social media. We're also going towards more workshops, more booths. I think a lot of green events are coming up where, for example, I think East Coast, for one, recently held an event where there were a lot of environmental booths, that kind of thing. So those are things that I guess on the advocacy side we're working to contribute to the net zero efforts. And then there are, of course, also other kinds of social media campaigns where we talk about maybe parliamentary questions and we kind of provide a bit more context on the ones that are environmental related. So I guess a lot of different facets when it comes to like advocacy related work. Yeah, so that's the space that I'm mostly involved in.
Thank you. Ismaili Civic works on everything from education to action, and what we essentially like to do is bring people from the intersection. So we have health practitioners and environmental stewards looking at new forms of programming. We work with a lot of our partners that might be working with elderly, for example, or migrant workers, and we say, be part of this conversation and look at how we could possibly create new forms of programming rather than maybe just doing knitting or going for a walk. How can we then maybe do mindful walks in nature? How could we do terrarium building for youth while having conversations about mental well-being? So we try and this is not us, it's the community that's coming together to do this. And I think my main point is that we like to work in these intersections, and that's the first. And our journey started a few years ago where during COVID, we started, and it was during my master's at SUTD that really kind of transformed my thinking around urban science and urban policies and communities. How can you look at it at a larger scale? So the point was that we started giving out potted plants to neighbors, to seniors in isolation. And we realized that this became a befriending activity between the befriender and the senior that's in isolation. Rather than saying, how are you, and breaking down into tears, they're now having conversations around the medium of the environment or a potted plant. And through that, it's kind of scaled to about 5,000-6,000 pots. But now we are kind of propagating these plants and giving it out to neighbors. So we look at how can we incorporate cohesion, community cohesion in a lot of the activities that we've been doing for many years, like tree planting. Instead of just doing tree planting, taking a photo with your family, now we get them to create memento cards where they leave messages of hope, unity on each other's tree. And that kind of creates there's a bit more than just, I know that neighbor's name now, I know which unit they're living in, and there's a bit of positive affirmations around the things that we've been doing on a regular basis. Thank you.
Wow, I'm impressed. So maybe just a little tip. You can work with schools, go for intergenerational bonding as well. I think that's interesting as well. Okay, hi, I'm actually a volunteer with Southwest CDC. So what's my organization about? Not best person to speak about it. Basically, Southwest CDC, can you just check, how many of you live in Southwest CDC? Southwest CDC. Okay, 1 out of, wow, 2. 2 out of everyone here, okay. Okay, depending on the pitch, we'll move there. Okay, so for Southwest CDC, what happens is that we look into aggregating the resources that we have within the district through also district councillors, volunteers like ourselves, and also to bond the community together through some activities. So like I mentioned earlier on, I was with the Sustainable Environment FC. So some of the key programs you might have heard of will be Eco Day Out, where we actually have a district-wide recycling event at the different divisions. So this is one. We also have the Green Schools Award ceremony, where we work with schools in the Southwest District to bring about an accreditation process in which we acknowledge the efforts put in by schools for them to gain certain recognitions at the district level as well. So these are some of the programs we do. Moving forward, I think something that the Environment FC as well as the Health FC we are working on is really to synergize the programs together. So under the health, we have the Fun Walkers. So this is something that they were started many years ago. So right now what we are doing is we're trying to guide the farm workers to take a walk in neighborhood parks, natural places. This is also a way in which we can bring about awareness on sustainability efforts, as well as to maintain their mental well-being as well. So we're trying to target a few things at the same time. So this is essentially what we do in Southwest CDC. Do follow our Facebook page as well as our Instagram page. Plenty of information there. I think good for us to just follow and just be kept updated on some of the activities we have, and volunteer if you can. All right, that's the pitch, man.
If you don't stay in Southwest CDC, can you volunteer there?
Yes, because we believe that every bit helps. So to the 2 of you here, yes, we expect, no, not expect. We would like you to continue volunteering now. For the rest of you, please feel free to chip in as well. No worries.
Yeah. Okay, thank Thank you. I think that's great. And what I distill from this is really about the partnerships. And it's not just about sustainability or the environment as a singular kind of objective or goal, right? It's about hitting, or not hitting multiple targets, but stringing together and trying to create a cohesive program or initiative that benefits in different areas. And to, of course, I think in this way, then it brings more people along and people will be more open to participate in it. And this is a small plug, and this we are doing it with Akbar's organization. So like this Saturday, we are working with Changi Simei to turn the space under the MRT viaduct into a community-driven festival, right? That is green and incorporates health. And it also incorporates the social element where we try to get the community in to design the whole festival, to run the whole festival, to man the festival, right? And the guiding principles are, of course, it has to be sustainable. We try to reduce the waste as much as possible. And then we incorporate some health. So we got the hospitals. Changi General Hospital is nearby. So they are participants of it. We got the schools involved. One of the conversations, we said we have the food trucks, but we do not have places for people to sit. Are we going to get plastic chairs in? Then we're like, no, perhaps we can call the primary schools and secondary schools in the area, we borrow your canteen chairs. Okay, it's on a Saturday, we take it on Saturday morning, we'll return on Saturday night, and then you will have it back on Monday. No one knows the better, right? But the community comes in, and then we need people to help shift. ITE College is helping to program some of this, and really the whole community beyond just the residents, all the different partners, and of course Akbar's signature program with the potted plants. If we needed decorations, right? If not, it will look very sterile. So they are putting the potted plants there, and also greening the place, livening up the place. But the residents then bring the potted plants back.
And they're actually, right now as we speak, they're nurturing the plants for the event. And this is something we did at SUTD last year as well, where we brought trees and decorative items, but then we took that and then planted it in the university as a carbon sink after the event. So one of the things I just want to share is that a lot of these events, in our daily lives, we have a lot of events, but can we measure our footprint at these events? Can we spend maybe 5 minutes and just educate the community about what is our footprint and how did the community reduce their footprint just after a few small efforts that the community made together? So yeah, thank you. Thanks, Samuel, for this opportunity.
Yes, so it's a small plug. It's a free event. You can come. And of course, as we heard this morning, it's important to evaluate. So we are also evaluating if this works. Can we scale it to other places, right? Yeah. Okay, so there are questions, a lot of questions. Some are very tough and loaded, but I think I put them together and ask based on your experiences and, of course, your travels and exposure to other countries, right? Are there some net zero related or sustainability related initiatives for the community or by the community that you think is something that you really like and you think that it could be brought back to Singapore?
I'll start. I was very fortunate to live in New Zealand, and one thing that I still get chills when I talk about it, because every time they start an event, every time they come together as a community, one of the things that they do very consciously is acknowledge the mountains, the rivers, and the environment, and their forefathers, their ancestors. And I think that culturally, we need to kind of be comfortable with the idea of being, we are a meritocratic society, and we do believe in things that are, around us, but also acknowledging the environment and the space is a very good, strong way of, acknowledging the environment that's allowed us to be present together as a community as well. So I think these sorts of a spiritual or a very conscious effort allows people to feel more comfortable. So as leaders of communities or within your organizations, it's okay to kind of say, we're very grateful to be here, and that mindful action kind of allows more conversation. Thank you.
I guess what comes to mind is the stuff that I saw other countries doing at COP, although I did feel like more of it was centered around like policy conversations, understandably. There were some sharings of like community efforts. I think a lot of the stuff that caught my attention was how people were doing food production, urban farming, community farming, how they're, like you said, working on the intersections, right, when it comes to social cohesion, food security, whether or not it lowers the carbon footprint of the food if you are growing it in a localized area. That and a lot of, I feel like they were very simple things like cycling campaigns. There were other youths who I spoke to who shared about how their countries went about kind of encouraging more people to cycle, but I do think that on that one, climate played a very big part. I can't remember exactly where the youth was from, but I remember it to not be as hot as Singapore. So I guess like cycling paths and infrastructure is one thing. I think Sam also talked about this actually a long time, not long time ago, but some time ago on CNA about how like weather also contributes to things like the modes of transportation that you choose from. So I guess in terms of what I've seen from other countries, I think food was one that stood out to me, and then public transportation.
Thanks, Rachel, Iqbal. Okay, before I answer the question, just very quickly, I want to pose a scenario to every one of us here. I stay near Bukit Batok, which is just down the road. For me to get here is a 15 minutes drive, okay, by car. If I were to take public transport, especially the peak hour and everything, I will likely take 45 minutes plus a long walk into this particular venue. That means I have to give up an hour of my sleep. And my line of work, we work until, we're well balanced, but we work until quite late.
But you start early.
I have my meetings at 5:45 a.m. Yeah, meetings with my key personnel as well. Those who are already there, not those here. We respect people's time. Okay, so just a quick question based on where I stay and everything. If you're in my situation, would you drive here? Okay, most of us would, because that hour, maybe it's a time that I can spend sleeping or can spend with my loved ones as well. Okay, what I'm trying to align this to is, I am an advocate for more legislation. You can stone me if you want, but I feel that for us to move towards net zero gains, stronger gains is that there should be stronger legislation in terms of some of these areas. Okay, systems, structures really drive behavior. So right now, if you look at the report itself, I think there's quite a lot of people who might not be so willing to change their lifestyle or the way that they operate or the way they think. But I believe that if there's certain legislation coming in, like what some countries do, some of this will change. And it will take time. It will take time, definitely. There will be certain unhappiness, definitely. But as we move on as a society, gradually, this will change the culture and the way that we operate as a society. So this is something that I just want to share.
So I think we see a range of responses and a range of potential ways in which to do it. But to Min Chai's point also that is Singapore ambitious enough? I mean, we have set a target, and we saw from the results, right? Most people are supportive of that target, but there are also people that think that it could be slightly more ambitious. Maybe we ask each of you, do you think Singapore could do more, at least from a citizen point of view?
Okay, I don't know, but Sam is always looking at me, so... Okay, okay, just off the cuff, I just want to... state this. Yes, according to the research finding, most people are supportive of the net gains. Okay. Pardon me, I'm a skeptic. Okay, by the way, I just want to put up a disclaimer there. When I meet people at 5:45, it's because they're already there working, okay? So I don't post set meetings at 5:45. I'm mindful of well-being as well. Okay, sorry, let me recollect my thought. Okay, so the thing is this. Yes, the survey did show that most people, in fact, a lot of people are supportive of our net zero targets. I am. But this morning, I chose to drive here. Yep. So I chose to drive here. I am supportive, but I chose to drive here. Would I have really taken the concrete steps to do that? So this is the type of the differences that we have to take into account when we are coming up with policies. Okay, maybe there should be maybe a legislation on the number of cars, on routes at a certain hour and things like that. All this will contribute as well. Okay, I have friends around me. I think Toliang is one of them. He's really living by the role modeling sustainable efforts. Why? Because tea break earlier on, how many of you took the disposable cups on the tea break? Okay, most of us lah. Don't pretend lah. Most of us He brought a little. He brought his own mug, something that can actually compress into this. Yep. I think he's a role model. He doesn't drive as well, and he walked here from his office earlier this morning. I think what is more important for us is really looking out for these role models, and really making an effort to change. So after his convincing and nagging, I decided that I'll start to walk more. Maybe take a walk more instead of driving to my hawker center nearby. I would want to just walk over there instead. Yep. So these are the little things we can do slowly, impacting change one by one, one by one. Yep.
Can Singapore do more?
Yes. Do you think Singapore can do more?
I think Singapore as a whole can do more, absolutely. I think a lot of support can happen amongst community partners as well. I mean, there's one project that we're working on right now is redesigning lifestyles for low-income families. So just to share some background, to live below the line, $12, when I spoke to low-income families, they said, we don't care about sustainability. We care about every dollar that we can save. And that's when it made me realize that it's just the optics. Actually, they're living one of the most sustainable lives. They are living by the dollar. And I remember when my parents and my, my grandparents would do certain things that I used to go, that's insane. Why are we having to save reuse the water from the washing machine to go and, to clean the floor? And I never understood that concept, but the idea was just to save water as much as possible. I don't think they were thinking about the planet and the environment, but I think there's hope and there's comfort knowing that there's a lot of history of practices that are being done in our cultures, which we're not tapping and learning cross-culturally as well. So I think that there's a lot that we could tap on and celebrate on the ground efforts and amongst our, amongst the elders as well. There's a lot of wisdom in there. So yeah, I think that's my first point. And I think that the second I was sharing was that about cars as well. I gave up my car. Samuel had a talk, CNA talk on, why do we care about polar bears? And he put me on the spot and said, you have a car, but then you came for a beach cleanup with the car. And I wanted to explain more, but I was like, wait, hang on, that's true, we need, I'm living two different lives here. But the point was that I needed that car, not so much to take my kid to school, because my kid goes to the school in the same campus that we live. My wife works in the same campus. So we don't really need the car. But the reason why I needed that car was because I could do a bit more community efforts, give out more plants, and But now we made that sacrifice after 6 months of back and forth between my wife, and we have this cultural thing that when we have people from overseas, they say, oh, you don't have a car? They look at you differently. It's a cultural thing. But then we have to kind of stand up and say, we don't need it. And we justify, we tell people $120 per day, I'm just losing, I could be putting it towards education or community. But I wish that there were policies that would allow people who want to do something for the community and can justify that they're using the car for a good cause to be given that opportunity. And so those who have 2-3 cars in their backyards and paying the same amount of tax, I don't know. I think that these are things that we could relook, and maybe then I can get a car. Just kidding. But I'm going through this transition, and it's very difficult as a family to not have a car. But it's a choice that we made, and thanks, Samuel, for that.
Yeah, just so happened we spotted Akbar and his organization doing the beach cleanup. Yeah, and we posed that question to them. So before Rachel answers, I also like to add on an additional question for Rachel, right? What are some of the challenges that you face? You're young, younger than the three of us. So call it out. No. Okay, but as a youth, and you call yourself a climate advocate also, right? I'm sure because you would want to see a better future, right? And one that's a bit more aspirational, perhaps a bolder vision that we have than what we have today. So what do you think this could be? Could we be more ambitious? Plus, what are some of your challenges, particularly as a climate advocate, right? Of getting yourself maybe heard or in the conversation?
I think the first one on like whether or not we're doing enough or whether we can be more ambitious. There's always room to be more ambitious. I think the balance is in striking whether or not you commit to a very ambitious goal, whether you are actually confident of getting there, or how much you can really like push before that bubble bursts, right? And you're just committing on paper, I guess, to something that you're not actually going to be able to go when you look at like the roadmap and stuff. So I think I'm quite comfortable personally with where our target is now, as to like what are challenges I face, like doing.
Climate advocate.
Yeah, okay. I guess a lot of stuff is like the complexity of the issues that we're trying to communicate. Like, for example, if you look at sustainable aviation fuel, right? Very good, I guess, in that sense for emissions. When you look at things like what are the second or third order consequences of pushing that and ramping that up, you're looking at things like biofuel plantations. Are those good for biodiversity? What is the impact on like land use clearing and stuff like that? So if, let's say, I start off wanting to share more about sustainable aviation fuel and how that reduces emissions, I then have to think about to which extent do I communicate like the second and third order consequences. And I think that not so much in advocacy maybe, but more on like communications in general, is one of the things that I feel are the most challenging. Yeah.
Okay, related to that, this is the second last question, just to assure the panel, right, that this is not never ending. This question is also raised by a couple of the member of the audience, and Rachel brought it up. What is the level that we should be communicating with the public or with the community? So we can communicate net zero, sustainability, and all with numbers and projections and everything. Or if we dump it down, make it very simple, then we might not be doing it justice, right? We might not be really helping them understand the complexity of the issue. So based on your experience working with your communities, where do you think is the balance? How do we communicate? How do we engage them? At which level?
I can start. I think it depends on your target audience, right? But for me, generally, I try not to. I will cover as comprehensively as I can, just because I feel like with that much complexity, it's up to the receiver what decision they want to make at the end of the day. So if you look at things like, again, going back to like emissions versus other sorts of environmental impact, you look at beef versus pork in Singapore. Pork actually has higher emissions, if I'm not wrong, because a lot of it is air flown, and because in general, I think so emissions-wise, if you look at it only from the emissions perspective, it is worse for the environment. But then when you look at like beef and what kind of implications there are when it comes to like grazing, when it comes to land use conversion, you get a very different picture. So usually when I communicate that kind of stuff, I just give them all the info. Of course, like things like visuals help, things like numbers definitely help, but not, I guess I'm also trying to be very careful with whether or not the data is reductive. So does it lose out on like the context of where that number came from, things like that. But generally the stance I take is you be as comprehensive as possible. Don't dumb things down in that sense, because I think even from the report we see that Singaporeans are more familiar with these things than we expect them to be. So rather than simplify it all the time, maybe try giving more complexity, more context, and let people come to their own conclusions is what I'm experimenting with now. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll just give another example, but I mentioned about the events earlier. When we started off, a lot of the events that we used to have around environment, we used to get people to sign up, and we tell them, can you tell us what mode of transport you'd use and stuff? So we kind of incorporated a way to measure their footprint before they come to the event, and then kind of present it to the audience. And there were so many gaps that we had, and we were okay with saying we don't know certain answers because we're still trying to find out. But what was interesting was that now we have started to make it even more interesting. Like we're trying this out, where if you want to choose that based on your dietary requirements, what sort of food would you like? We kind of give them an estimate of how much of a footprint will they be creating. Would they like to use the electric bus option for us to charter from those who are coming from the west for the event? And would you like to plant a tree at the end of the event? And the numbers are very interesting where a person's footprint would be very different for each as an individual. And I think we are trying to customize that ability for people to realize their personal footprint instead of just seeing it as one big, few thousand tons of footprint that we've created from an event. I think what I'm trying to say is that if you can, I think there's a carbon footprint calculator that you might have come across at the PUB. Is it PUB, right? SP. Sorry, SP has a very good calculator. There's another one by NUS on events as well. But I think if you can incorporate it into your daily activities, we even have a climate workshop where we do on designing your 2-ton lifestyle to live a 2-ton carbon footprint lifestyle. And it'll be surprising, like my footprint was 17 tons a year. But after certain actions, we were able to bring it down to a certain, I don't want to say the number, still paise, still a bit embarrassing. But I think the point is that we need to kind of allow people to craft their own journey. That's my main point. Thank you.
Okay, glad for Rachel and Iqbal to give their pieces because if you notice when Rachel mentioned to give the full details, by the way, I've just checked out her Instagram page, solid information there. That's only for a certain segment of the community. There will be for those who understand the terminologies, maybe the more educated ones. How about our kids, those in schools? How about our akong and amas, the older generation? How about people who might not understand the report itself? Okay, so if it comes to communication, I think I'm very candid. We can do a lot more. It's basically comms. Or in some words, when you talk about the 3 E's, there's the E for education. I think it's important for us to take things out, look at the different segments of the community they are in, customize your comm to that particular segment. It might require dumbing down the report itself. But if you show the whole report to Akong Ama who is queuing out to buy coffee, and they will not know what's going on. But if you tell them that things like, for example, 节省用水, or save water, don't use too much electricity. These are the things that you can do, and they are used to as well, because they were part of the campaign much earlier on, a few generations ago. So I believe in comms, but I believe in multi-segmented comms. Must be several prongs. Yeah. Full report is good because you want to find out more information, can just go in and just take a look. But it's also good for us to comms out as a whole government to the different segments they are looked into, from schools to the different NGOs to step boards as well. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, for the last question, it will be very simple. I think Akbar is very used to it already. We put you in the spot, okay? So, based on all of this, how are you reducing your carbon footprint now in your small way, right? Because we talk about the how-to guide, and everyone is able to pave your way forward. Okay, so I will not put you in the spot yet. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds to think. I will share how I'm doing it. Like just now, I admitted earlier, I am not using reusable diapers for my babies. Okay, but I've transitioned to kind of being a bit more aware with your food choice. Where are you getting your food? Whether it's more locally sourced, that's one, and more seasonally sourced, right? I'm not eating food that is out of season. If it's out of season, that means, it might have been in a chiller somewhere for months, right? An example like avocados. Okay? Tastes great, looks great, in a lot of cafes, but what is its carbon footprint? Right? So that's what I've been trying to do, and I think it's to the agency's effort, I think it's made a lot easier now compared to many years ago. But I think, that's one way I'm trying to do. What about you, the three of you?
Okay, I believe in starting small. Okay, small steps, baby steps. Okay, one big change that I made a few years back is that I started bring my mug to the canteen to get my daily dose of coffee. I make quite a lot of, I would like to think that there's a lot of impact on that, simply because for some reasons, I do not know why, they are still using the styrofoam cups and everything. Maybe I should just legislate and just ban it from my canteen. But anyway, just aside. So I'll bring a mug there. I drink about 6, 7 cups a day. So that's the equivalent of several styrofoam cups. I think that's great. So this is one. 2, I have been talking more to my relatives, especially my own parents, about things like saving energy, saving electricity, and stuff like that. So I'm doing my small part, albeit very small part, in changing the mindset of people around me as well. Yep. Start small. Start small.
For one, I took the bus here, although I don't have student fare anymore, so it got very expensive very quickly, public transport. So public transport is definitely one. Food is one, so I try to do like 3 veg when I order from mixed rice stalls, but that doesn't make me vegetarian because there's still meat in the veg, but at least it's a reduction, right? I guess on the list there, one of the things I picked up was I don't sleep with the aircon. And then I used to live in the school hostel, so I never used the dryer there, so I hung up everything, which I guess counts according to the report, so yeah.
Okay, you know about the car, right? So still going through trauma. But okay, I think the other thing is that we are actually, the family is now finally decided to go into composting, which is something that I really completely did not understand, and I don't want dirt in my house. I just didn't want that. But I think I've started to find circles, trusted people that can advise me how to do this. How can this be done? So last three months or so, we've been doing this, and we didn't realize how powerful just this. Some know it as black gold, because after it's been composted, it's actually very nutritious for your plants. And I don't keep any plants in the house, even though we distribute so many. We just nurture them, we give it out. But we are using this black gold to kind of give it out to our neighbors who have plants. So it seems to be a very interesting way of kind of engaging people. We're not, okay, another thing that I'm doing is actually even negotiating with my family. All my family is now overseas. Some live in New Zealand, some in Canada, my wife's side as well. But we decided that we cannot keep traveling all over the world. So we alternate. We negotiate with the families that say, okay, this time you're coming to Singapore, we'll see you in 3 years. Or you want to come to Singapore and we can catch out Thailand and Malaysia and just have smaller trips around the area. And it seems to be much more powerful. So yes, more tourism for our region, but I think there are a lot of us Singaporeans that are overseas as well. So yeah, these are small actions that we're trying.
So I hope using our own case, I urge everyone here to think what we could all do, right, in our small ways, to pave the way forward, to do small actions, and cumulatively it will all add up in terms of its impact. Okay, so now I think we end the panel and pass to Olivia.
Sam and panelists, thank you so much for that. What a great bunch of completely realistic and yet hopeful stories we just heard. And there's no kind of false optimism or misguidedness there. We're dealing exactly with the issues we face every single day, but we're hopeful, and we spot actions that we can take from now on. We've spoken a lot about communications, and I mentioned that we have, in our first effort, is to put together this little guide. I think quite a lot of people have grabbed them already, but there are a few more sitting on the table outside. 2 things. One is that I talked about monitoring and evaluation. Please give us feedback. If you think that there is information we should have included, better information out there which we could put into it, or better ways to present it, we would love to hear from you about that. We're quite easy to find, and our website is on the back. Second thing is, we've been talking about sustainability all morning. Why did we print out a glossy version of our brochure, which is anyway available online? And so I would like to think, for anybody who did pick it up, I would like you to think of it like a disposable shopping bag. Take it with you and read it thoroughly, and then pass it and make sure that everybody in your workplace reads it, and then collect it and take it home and make sure all your family members read it. And then in a year or so's time, come and show it to me, all dog-eared. 100 people read this. And then I will feel that it was worthwhile and it started to have that impact. Thank you so much for joining us today, this morning. And thank you so much for the efforts that you're already making, I'm sure, I know, to reach the net zero goal.